Good morning and a very warm welcome to you. I'm Peter Ndoro. You're watching Media Monitor on SABC's news channel, broadcasting live from our Auckland Park studios here in Johannesburg, just on the edge of the centre of the city. Now, on the program this morning, we put the spotlight on decisions made by Sentech, the country's signal distributor, to shut down something in the order of 17 community radio stations across the country. And we'll also be unpacking the rationale behind the shutdown, speaking to all the role players. We'll also look at the winners of the US Pulitzer Prize Award, and we also look at our own awards and the upcoming Nat Nakasa Awards, and our regular look, of course, at community media. We'll also shine the spotlight on the community radio Hot 91.9 FM, which really did well. The station shocked South Africa by beating the big players to bag a number of awards at the Liberty Radio Awards this past week. All of that coming up. But first, let's take a look at some of your headlines that you're waking up to this morning, and we begin with the Sunday Times. Let's take a look and see what's on the front page. Well, here it is. The Sunday Times is leading with a story about a herd of cattle costing 1.5 million rand and meant for emerging farmers was instead delivered to Nkandla, and that as a gift for former President Jacob Zuma from his political ally, Northwest Premier Supra Mahumapelo. The City Press, they're running a story about how President Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC leadership feared a bloodbath in the Northwest province if they had gone ahead and removed the defiant Premier and ANC provincial chairperson, Supra Mahumapelo. The Sunday Independent is leading with a story about how two prominent businessmen will go head-to-head tomorrow in Randburg Magistrates Court in what's expected to result in a landmark ruling on racism between two black men. Now, the Sunday Tribune is leading with a story about how time could be up for a crooked cabal of magistrates, prosecutors and police who are allegedly working closely with a criminal syndicate to subvert justice in KwaZulu-Natal. Now, the Weekend Argus is leading with a story all about Nonkayiso Konko, who gave birth to former President Jacob Zuma's child a week ago. The pair are to be wed soon. And moving beyond our borders, the Swaziland Sunday Observer is leading with a story, a blow for ACC Pali probe. And the Daily Trust, lastly, Nigeria's Daily Trust is running with a story about the battle lines between the Progressive Congress Party members as the party sets for its convention, which is scheduled for the 14th of May in Lagos. Interest blocs within the party are scheming for a firm grip at the national, state and ward levels. That's what's happening in West Africa and Nigeria. All right, okay, so coming up in a few moments' time, Sentech has shut down 17 community radio stations. We're going to find out why they did that. Is there a rationale behind that? And can they be saved? Stay with us for that.
Special assignment. Crime keeps the society in terror and pain. Why so?
If someone phones me, just phones me, tells me, okay, look here, I need a silver, and I get you all driving, I'll take it.
What pushes normal people to be so hard, heartless, and brutally kill one another?
The other side of it could be more for their own psychological need. It might be part of a sexual fantasy that they have. It could be about power and control.
After proper investigation is followed, the perpetrator gets arrested.
It's quite a massive process. And ultimately, they have to have limits. I think justice is served.
Emotional scars remain.
We would pay any price to get him back, and the sad reality is that it's gone.
Special assignment. We unravel the truth every Sunday at 21:30.
Shervin Bricebys, SABC News, New York.
Paul Barber, SABC News, London.
Tebu Mokobo, SABC Ufa go tswa mono Russia.
Neha Punia, SABC News, Saharanpur in Uttar Pradesh in India.
Other than that, I've enjoyed every single moment of it.
Tapana Ngatani, SABC News, Soweto, Johannesburg.
Top of the morning to you. If you're just waking up and you're tuning into the SABC News channel, you know that at this time every week we have the program Media Monitor, and we're right in the middle of it. And there's been quite a lot of things happening on community radio this week. The 15 community radio stations were suspended for non-payment, but apparently they'll be reconnected. And this follows a meeting between the new Communications Minister Nomvula Mokonyane, the National Community Radio Forum, the Media Development and Diversity and Signal Distributor Sentech, who had blocked the signal of a number of community broadcasters for not paying for the service. It's reported that a total of 108 community radio stations are in arrears, collectively owing Sentech more than 30 million rand in outstanding fees. Here in studio is Sentech's Head of Corporate Affairs and Communications, Melissa Kentane. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
All right, so 30 million rand is a lot, and I guess partly you need money to function, but community radio is really important. So did you have to suspend these stations? Was that something that you felt is the only way to go forward?
Well, Peter, the suspension of the community radio broadcasters was really I would call it a last resort. I mean, if you look at what has been happening, we've been communicating the arrears since 2016. So it's some of them we've been communicating for more than 30 months. So we had gotten to a point where we were saying we have got to at least do something. So we are aware of the importance of community broadcasters. We've had very long and good relationships with community broadcasters. But we had to get to a point where we were looking at the business as a whole, and the sustainability of state-owned companies is very critical.
All right, so on Friday, Minister met with the stakeholders. What came out of that meeting?
Well, Peter, the meeting was very progressive and it came out with very good results, I think. We appreciate the Minister's intervention, actually. So she did request that Sentech come through and meet with all the stakeholders that were affected by the suspension plan that we had started implementing. And there was an agreement that we reached in that meeting. And we were requested that based on the agreement from the parties in that meeting, we should switch on the community broadcasters. So we had started phase 1 and we had suspended 17 at that point in time. All of them have now been switched back on. So immediately after that meeting and the agreement was in place, we then started switching the community broadcasters back on.
All right, okay. Let's just hear from the Minister herself and just to see what her thoughts were on this issue.
The fact that community radio stations or community media, the community media sector hasn't been receiving any sufficient support, from the state. We know that the history of South African community media has been one of painstaking resilience. So I think on the one hand, yes, it may have to deal with affordability, but I think largely it deals with policy gaps around having sufficient support for the community radio media sector. So I think that needs to really be addressed.
All right, as you can see, that's not the Minister of Communications, but a concerned citizen, as most people have been watching this story unfold. So they're switched back on, but you're still broke. So what was agreed that's going to help you as Sentech?
Well, I won't say that we are still broke. Yeah. Obviously, what we had been saying was we needed to have payment agreements in place. So if you remember, when we switched off the 17, within that same week, 4 came back and agreed to the payment proposals, and we had an agreement in place, and then we agreed on the payment agreement. They did pay a certain amount, and then there would be an installment process that would take place. So what we were looking for really was commitment that the payments will take place, because if you look at it, Peter, if we're going to spend 30 months trying to get you to at least have some kind of payment agreement with us, it made the situation very difficult. So when we had the meeting with the minister on Friday, and there was progress and an indication that, you know what, there is an agreement, we will support the community broadcasters. Obviously, we'll be looking at the details as the week continues. So during this coming week, the details of exactly what that agreement will entail. But we have switched back on because there is that commitment that payments will happen.
All right, so, you know, us as the public broadcaster, the SABC, we know how difficult it is to make any kind of money, and particularly for radio. And I would imagine that it's even worse for community radio stations. So how do they make their money? Because clearly, the only way to fix this is for them to have a sustainable model that they can work with so that they can make money to pay you.
Yes, but I think, Peter, where we come from is the perspective that we are a service provider or a supplier of signal distribution. So we have individual contracts with each community radio broadcaster, and in that agreement, it clearly stipulates that we're going to render services, they're going to pay for those services. So that is really the agreement in place, because in order for us to provide those services, we need to actually get money coming in. You have to consider the fact that we have to pay electricity, we have to pay rental space for the satellites that we rent out in space, and all the other costs that the organization has to pay for.
If we agree that community radio is essential, particularly for things like furthering democracy, communicating with people, particularly on ground level, and we can already see that some of them are not going to make it. They just don't have the infrastructure. And I would say even particularly in the rural areas where they're mostly needed, they're going to struggle. Might we need to find another way to fund Sentech?
Well, I think we need to have an understanding, Peter, that, you know, we've got state-owned companies and we've got government department. So state-owned companies have a developmental agenda, yes, but we also have a commercial mandate. So we have to make sure that we are not draining the state fiscus. So we have to be able to stand on our own as a state-owned company, which Sentech has been doing very well over the years. But I'm very pleased that there is some kind of government intervention in that space. So that is an engagement, I believe, that the community broadcasters with government and obviously the other state-owned agencies that actually are involved in that space will be able to resolve as well.
What is government going to do? I mean, what have they said to you? Are they going to give you some money?
Well, Peter, we're not really the government itself, so obviously we can't really say what it is that they are going to do. But at least there has been some commitment that there will be support to community broadcasters, if you look at what was said by the minister, as well as some of the support on financial training and administration and all the engagements that they want to have with the community broadcasters. So we are hopeful that with that arrangement, the community broadcasters will stand. I also want to state that, you know, that obviously the community broadcasters versus commercial, obviously their tariffs and the requirements are not the same. So at this point in time, we have really lowered as much as we can, and with remaining sustainable as the organization as well.
All right, so one of the things that I'm also concerned about, 1992, when community radio stations started rolling out, there were none. And then all of a sudden, I think we're well over 200 now. Could it be that we are over-licensing and there's just too many for the number of people that are out there?
Well, Peter, we don't license the community broadcasters, unfortunately.
Okay, so you're going to leave that. Let me introduce Tebogo Dishego, who's a media analyst, and he's going to be helping us look at our newspapers in a short while. Tebogo, this community radio story, I mean, it is a concern, and I just wonder what your take is on it, because clearly, commercially, we can't license until the cows come home. At some point, we have to say, there's only so many South Africans, there's only so much money that can be made, and we have to stop licensing. Do you think that ICASA gave too many licenses, that we're in a situation now, or are they just being poorly run? Because you've got Hot 90.1 that's beaten everybody at the Liberty Awards, and Josie FM, which have proved that community radio stations can compete when they run well. Are the others, these 15, 17, just poorly run? What's the story?
Well, that's a very complex one, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you spoke about the funding model. I don't think that there's over-licensing. I think, you know, we have an issue in South Africa, an economic issue of inequality. We have a social issue also of inequality. And these community radio stations are the voice of the voiceless. They do provide a platform, you know, for their issues to be raised. And it is a medium that actually fills the gaps that mainstream media doesn't have the resources to fill, or perhaps has been neglecting to fill. Another thing is that in terms of our unemployment rate, once you've switched off the signal, people are going to go hungry. People, their voices are going to be shut down. So we cannot look at it only primarily as a commercial issue. We also have to look at it from a developmental standpoint. Obviously, you know, my colleague from Sentech is limited in the scope in which she can communicate how this thing can be resolved, because she's not the Department of Communications. She's not ICASA. So in this conversation, we need to have the Department of Communications and ICASA so that we can look at the funding model of Sentech and of these community radio stations. I think, broadly speaking, also my industry, the media industry, advertising industry, must also come to the party, you know, to advertise in community platforms in order for them to become sustainable, because you will find that the founder of Hot 91.9 has other business interests and has good connections that can link the station to the advertising revenue.
Yeah, in fact, it's starting to happen already. Statistics are showing that a lot of community radio is being used, particularly where languages are concerned. We had invited the National Community Radio Forum president, Duduzi Banana, to join us in studio, but hasn't come through. Perhaps he might still, I'm not sure, but we wanted to get their opportunity. And perhaps just as an indicator, I don't know if it is, I went on their website, the NCRF, to get some information, and guess what? It's been closed down due to non-payment. And I think this speaks volumes really to the plight of community radio. And I'm just wondering, and perhaps for both of you, but you know, you're a signal distributor, but much of what you're saying suggests this is public broadcast. So should they be under the SABC or? Well, that's interesting.
I don't think the SABC would have the capacity to manage them. I also think that from an independence point of view, you know, having them being independent does strengthen our democracy, because they can make their decisions without thinking about the overreaching editorial policy of the SABC. So I think the model currently is fine, but the problem comes in the funding model. Also, us understanding their agenda, because, you know, I work in the public relations industry. You'll find my clients will be having an event in the KZN, and they have paid for PR. And they haven't had a budget for advertising. And you'd contact them, and they'd even travel to the event to inform the community, because it is an important event. But then they don't have the resources to continue like that without you having to pay. And so that becomes a bit of a challenge.
Okay, all right. So unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there for the time being. But Melissa, thank you very much for joining us. And I guess the big story is that you're switching them back on, and that discussions are underway, and hopefully long-term solutions are in play.
I think, Peter, though, just to add there, is that it's very important to understand that Sentech also thinks community broadcasters are critical, and that is why it has taken so long for us to get to this point. But as we said, we will be looking at how we can assist the community broadcasters. But as we said, we're very pleased with the Minister's intervention, and we'd really look forward to furthering the working relationship there.
All right, Sentech's Melissa Kantani, thank you very much indeed. We'll We'll continue our conversation after this short break. Stay with us.
Yes, yes.
Sports Live every Saturday and Sunday at 7:30 p.m.
All right, welcome back, and it's that time of the year when South African journalists begin dusting up their past work to submit to the Nat Nakasa Award for Media Integrity, given to a South African media practitioner or newspapers, magazines, broadcasters and online print media whose reporting celebrates freedom of speech and media integrity. Now, the award is named in honor of a black South African journalist and drum writer Nat Nakasa.
Look, we call on editors, news managers, journalists and news managers who are in newsrooms, whether it's broadcast journalism, whether it's print, whether it's digital, who have been brave and courageous in the past year to enter the Nat Nakasa Award for this year. The awards will be held in later June, around the 23rd of June. So the awards basically are about honoring the memory and the legacy of Nat Nakasa. As you may know, Nat Nakasa is a very prominent name when it comes to South African journalism, and we're still talking about Nat Nakasa to this day, after he was, he left this country and he was told by the then government that he must never return, and he died in the States. So the awards are really saying Nat Nakasa was that kind of journalist. He was brave, he was courageous, he had integrity, and he was the kind of journalist that South Africa, to this day, we still see those kind of journalists.
All right, so that's the Nat Nakasa Award and given in memory and the name of that black journalist who in the 60s was quite pioneering and brave at a time when it was very dangerous just to be a journalist. But let's now take a look at see what newspapers and the reports have been writing and what have been capturing your imagination over the past year. Platforms for hardworking journalists and practitioners are the sort of platforms well enough to reward journalists for their hard work that they put in. Well, that's a question we have to ask the Nat Nakasa Award, and I just wonder, it is a big award and it's an important award, but is it enough to make sure that we have a growing culture of good journalism, brave journalism, full of integrity?
I don't think it is enough. And I think it goes back to how we train journalists from the universities and then how they get trained once they are on the job. What has been missing, throughout the years, I've been writing columns for newspapers for 10 years. And in that, I saw that there's a huge gap in how the issues of people in the townships and rural areas are addressed. And that is why we seem to see a culture of violence before you see action. You can't really rationalize the violence. You can't explain it away. But people have seen that if they are violent, then there are results. And that is not how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to create a society where the people become the think tank and the people's opinions are taken seriously. And when you address an issue, you don't have to follow up 10 times before it is actually seen. I saw a tweet the other day where somebody said that She asked for trees to be planted on her streets, over 10 years ago. And she's still trying to ask for that to happen. Why should townships be deserts and the suburbs be luscious, beautiful places? And why should township schools provide poor education and then the schools that are more opulent provide better education? That is not how we're going to sort out our inequalities. So I want to see a situation where we have media role players that democratize, the stories that are going out, that actually go into these townships, into these rural areas, look for the stories and report them.
All right, so another story that caught my attention. Friday last week, we were supposed to see the listing of a new media company, Stagomata, and it didn't happen. And papers on Friday were saying that media was being used competitive media was being used against the independent media group to foil this listing. What do you make of this story? I mean, Iqbal Survey talked about it being Stratcom version 2018. He says this is like the Gestapo in World War II, the tactics that have been employed with this particular listing. And the PIC was supposed to help fund this.
Well, look, if there is a conspiracy against the media house and they are using uncompetitive tactics in order to ensure that we don't have different voices coming out, it's okay for you to write about that. But I'm actually offended with the characterization that it is Stratcom. And I'm offended because that undermines the legacy of Mama Winnie Mandela. As soon as you say that Stratcom tactics are being used against you, you are going closer to equating yourself to the level of Mama Winnie Mandela. And I would ask you, have you been in torture for 7 days and 7 nights? Have you been incarcerated, for 18 months in solitary confinement? Were you fighting, for the liberation movements while people were being incarcerated, keeping the flag and the torch of the liberation high for more than 30 years? No, you weren't. So you cannot equate a business dealings where somebody is messing around with your profits, messing around with your reputation to that of Stratcom, because Stratcom was created to discourage.
So poor use of adjectives and whatever, but is there a story there though? Do they have a case that they've been unfairly targeted by competitive forces to derail them?
Well, I think they believe that they do have a case, but to talk about apartheid era dirty tricks, that is not, you cannot equate the same amount of power to those two.
All right, okay. What else is in the paper today? I see, what grabbed your attention? Sunday Independent is what's in your hand?
Yeah, so the black racism is in court. So there are two executives who are fighting. One executive called the other, both black people. Yes. The K word. And he wants to now take him to court for criminal injuria. And the magistrate's court is going to decide whether or not a black person can be racist against another black person.
It is an interesting debate, and we were having it with the guys on the floor the other day, because in the US, the Americans can call each other the N-word.
Yes.
And as long as you're black, it's okay.
Yeah.
How do you see it? I mean, can it be racist for a black person to call another black person the K word?
No, not in my opinion. Perhaps it could be prejudiced, because blacks can be prejudiced against other black people. We've seen xenophobia, we've seen tribalism, so it is possible to be prejudiced, but you can't be racist as a black person against another black person. I'm actually interested because we're going to have a law that is passed. It's already been approved by cabinet to tackle hate speech and hate crimes. And it goes from albinism to hate crimes against the LGBT community and racism and gender violence, verbal violence. I'm interested in seeing if a black person can be deemed racist against any other race? Because that is a very interesting technical and philosophical question to answer.
I mean, what could be interesting as well is the definition of black, because that's what's going to really be. I mean, you and I, it's obvious, I guess, you know. But what if I'm a quarter European? Do you know what I mean? Then what? You know, so is it the shade of skin? If I'm pitch black or almost white? You know, where am I in that spectrum?
And it's interesting because our constitution says we should push towards non-racialism.
All right, so Supra Mahumapelo keeps finding his way into the front pages. You talked about violence, Mahikeng. I'm going to be looking at that again in a short while. And in the front page of the Sunday Times, you're going to see this picture here. And what it is, there we go. Mahikeng is in flames on the one side, but on the other, Supra's gift to President Zuma, 1.5 million rands worth of cows. That's extraordinary.
Look, earlier last year, there was a debate on social media where we were discussing, as a sitting president, morally, should you be accepting a statue in your honor? Are we not creating a cult of personality? And are we not wasting state resources? You know, because it can be seen as celebrating yourself. There's a bit of a conflict of interest there. So I think it speaks to the precedents that we are setting. Should a state official who is senior accept such gifts from another department, even if it's clandestine and it wasn't, you know, directly? So this is going to be interesting because the Hawks are now investigating.
All right, Tebogo, we're going to carry on our conversation in a short while because this just looks at print, and more and more, especially young people, are consuming their news and looking at their stories through the digital space and social media. And Bukule is with our digital team at the SABC News. Always great to chat to you. And you can catch us up with, first of all, what's trending today?
Thanks for having me, Peter. The top 5 trends for today is the Nedbank Cup, Kaizer Chiefs, the Sharks and the Stormers, and Dr. Zola Skweyiya. But we'll start with the Nedbank Cup. We saw that the head coach of Kaizer Chiefs has resigned, and this is after the barbaric behavior by Kaizer Chiefs fans last night at a game between them and the Free State Stars. Now Kaizer Chiefs lost 2-0 to the Stars, and the fans were just angry and started coming into the field and attacking security guards. And we see in a video where they attack a female security guard, kicking her in the head.
And burning. Okay, so they lost. They got upset and they just went on the rampage. And these kinds of images we don't want to see. So what's been the reaction then from Twitter space? What have people been saying on social media?
People have called out the Kaizer Chiefs fans for not maintaining being Abafana Bothula Noxolo, meaning peace. So they've called them out for that. And they've also mentioned that people have been complaining about the coaches and about Kompela, asking him to resign, and Kaizer Chiefs has not acted upon that. Now that people are reacting, they're going to say something, they are doing something about it. Okay. So people have been saying such things.
So tell me what they're saying. Let's have a look at the next tweet, what it says.
Kaizer Chiefs and ANC, same WhatsApp group, they don't listen to their people until things go ugly. This could have been avoided.
And the last one. Okay, so what's scary about these pictures is that we've got a guy who's just about to kick this security guard, and she is a woman. And this is the one thing that people didn't perhaps see when the clip rolled for the first time. He's about to kick her in the head. And what we do know now is that she was injured quite severely, and this was the result. Yes, he knocked her out. And she's critically in hospital at the moment. So these are ugly scenes and requiring a lot of attention. All right, let's move away from Nedbank. The other story that's been running the whole week takes us to the Northwest Province.
Yes, the Mahikeng protests. You know, as you know, Peter, there have been riots in Mahikeng, and people have been protesting for service delivery and have been calling on their Premier Supra to be to resign as well. And a lot of violence has been going on. We saw that our Minister of Police was there yesterday, and we saw the President addressing the people of Mahikeng during the week. So businesses have been disrupted, the hospital and the clinics have been disrupted, schooling has been disrupted, and people have been tweeting this morning saying that the price of bread has gone up because it is so scarce.
Wow. So, again, ugly scenes, tires being burnt, being barricaded, and there you go, 20 Rand for a loaf of bread. And this is supply and demand factors.
Yes.
Because there's not a lot of it, they can push up the prices. So these protests, landing on the table and the desk of Supra Mahumapelo, but discussions still in play. What have people been saying on Twitter about what we've seen?
One tweet that I took note of, or a report that I took note of this morning, a civilian was shot by a bullet from the riots in the head and is dead, and it is reported that they are a Sentech member. Boitumelo says here, what way forward is President Cyril Ramaphosa looking for? #Mahikeng protest. It seems like a lot of people are asking for questions. What is the way forward? What is the government doing about the violence that is going on in the Northwest?
All right, okay, that's a story that continues to unfold. Continue. All right, so then let's take another tweet in the Mahikeng thing, because it was a big story.
It was a big story.
Karabo says, I want to live in a South Africa where the government listens to the people and not wait for protests to become violent before they act. Okay, and then one more, I think.
The last one says, Ndate Jackson, why is it that last week your party was apologizing for threatening Winnie Mandela badly, and again this week another apology for treating Ndate?
All right, and then I guess the next big story is that we had another stalwart who passed away, and he had a Category 1 funeral yesterday, and the President paid tribute to him in a speech, a eulogy yesterday. Let's take a listen.
We bid farewell to one of the best amongst us. We bid farewell to a gentle soul and a formidable freedom fighter whose remarkable legacy will endure long after all of us are gone.
So, Sydney Temba Zolasqueia being laid to rest yesterday, and this is a man who, when I was looking at social media and watching the story unfold, nobody had a bad word to say about this man.
Not at all, Peter, not at all. He was remembered as a person who upheld the Batupile principles. He was remembered as a freedom fighter and a person who wanted social justice for everyone. So people have been mourning him throughout ever since they heard of his passing and were saddened by the news. But Peter, what's interesting, there are people who are complaining, saying that we don't honor our struggle icons enough till they die. So that was the sentiment around his death.
Is there any tweets that we can see?
We have some tweets.
Let's take a look and see what people were saying. In fact, all right, let's take a look at one final image, and that was the President. And he's done a lot of these eulogies this month of April, which has been quite a sad month for South Africans in general.
Yeah, but the one tweet that was interesting is that he was still apologizing for not treating the party, for not treating him as a stalwart in a right manner. Same with Umama Winnie, he did an apology. They're asking how many times will he apologize?
All right. Yeah. Okay. Bukula, thanks very much indeed for giving us an update on what's been happening on social media. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll look at other issues and also look forward to what might be trending in the week ahead. Stay with us. You're watching Media Monitor.
Our stories.
How do I begin?
Our lives. When all seems to fail, we will raise our voices a bit louder for our justice.
Well, I went into absolute shock. My whole body was shaky. I couldn't hold a phone, but there he was. I couldn't believe the nonchalance that they were still in the area 2 weeks later.
times when the justice system is not able to help us with our individual battles.
I'm willing to do anything.
What are you doing? Nothing. Feeling sorry for yourself. No, it's not an option.
These are our stories on Cutting Edge Channel 404.
Hello, welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, the youngest inductee in the history of the Liberty Radio Awards, the Johannesburg Community Radio Hot 91.9 FM, won big last weekend's awards, bagging a total of 10 awards. Let's take a look at this.
We're thrilled. This is 10 awards for us this year, including 2 Hall of Fame inductees. Station of the Year, Most Loyal Listeners, as well as was voted for Radio Station. Last year as well, 10 awards. In fact, over the 3 years, we've had 44 nominations. We're thrilled to do what we do. We've got a passion for radio. And it's great to be acknowledged by people within the industry for doing a great job within it. We have a lot of fun doing what we do, and I feel that if we stop the fun factor, we stop doing great radio. So yes, it definitely has boosted the morale as it would, and we're definitely on a high. So we're so thrilled and pleased to have these awards and be acknowledged within the industry. Not only does it help with our advertising revenue, it also builds with the audience as well. And you know, it's because of the audience that we're number one. So we're very grateful.
Well, as part of Media Monitor's weekly celebration of South Africa's community media, we visited Hot FM, the Station of the Year winner at the Liberty Radio Awards, and our producer, Lwavela Jongilanga, was there to the station, and he captured the attention of many listeners with their old school and R&B music as she spoke to Hot 91.9 FM's head of news, first asking her about what dominated their news bulletins this past week.
We are just coming from a week where Winnie Madikizela Mandela's burial and also the announcement of her death was just dominating headlines. It doesn't matter whether you're community, whether you're commercial, whether you're a public service announcement station. That is just, you know, she was dubbed the mother of the nation. So everything else had to take a back seat, and that was definitely our biggest focus. And the conversations happening around those, that story specifically, and just the social media activism, you know, that started, you know, the whole "she didn't die, she multiplied," that was a huge thing, you know. It started with a small message, you know, doing the rounds, it circulated, and then the whole nation partook in that. So that was definitely a leading story in the past couple of days. So we're still recovering from that. And then I would say this week, there was actually a report that came through yesterday, and we've been leading with that story to say that over 2,000 patients are on the waiting list for surgery at the Charlotte Maxeke Hospital. So we're looking into that. Just before we had this conversation, we received news from our listeners on air saying that there's some sort of protest action happening by Cresta on Beesnodere, where people are setting alight tires, and this is due to evictions that happened there recently. So yeah, it's just a lot of activity going on.
How much influence does the community have with regards to the selection of stories that you guys put in your bulletins?
Obviously, through the guidance of ICASA, you know, we've managed to put ourselves on the database, or asked to be added onto the database or the mailing list of your ER24s, your SPCAs, your security companies are very useful for community stories, because they're the ones that usually respond to the crimes in our community, and also a lot of the great organizations that are just busy with great initiatives, like, the usual cleanups every now and again, and the Friends of the Golden Harvest Park that is just down the road from us. So it takes a lot from the community to maintain the type of stature that we want to see as a community. And yeah, it takes also speaking to the people who are directly involved. Your community policing forums, your police stations are very helpful. And also I'm just thinking city power, through all the updates that come through on Twitter about the power outages and people complaining, saying, I haven't had power for 5 days, what is going on? City Power usually has all those answers. So through that, we've decided to create a feature called the Power Plan. So that's where we let people know which areas are experiencing power outages, what the estimated time of restoration is, and what the cause of the outages could be, just so also we give our listeners time to prepare themselves and to make the necessary arrangements that they need to make. We are a bunch of overachievers here at Hot 91.9. Yeah. That's what I've come to learn personally. And we are surrounded by legends who have years of experience, behind them. And it is such a pleasure to work for people who have been doing this for so long. But now the challenge comes in that our mandate from ICASA is that as a community radio station, obviously we have to bring up and develop the talent, even if it is talent that is still raw, like the rawest of talents. If somebody comes to me and says, listen, I've never done news before, but I am interested, I'm always following news developments and so on and so forth, then the onus is on me to take that person and train them up to become, the future Gladys Itoles or the Yvette Johnsons and so on that you hear on air. So my challenge, this is just one that I can think just from the top of my head, would be then now the different dynamics, because in the news department now you have a few newsreaders who have the experience, as I mentioned earlier, and then you still have to balance that out with the up-and-coming newsreaders or journalists who have never done this before. So I find that I'm working with, with the ones that still need the work and still need the training. They usually are under a lot of pressure because of the experienced ones and how fast we work and that they need to catch up. But, you give it a few weeks and you monitor and you realize that they catch on very quickly. And some of our new newsreaders have gone on to become some of our best on air. So, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And also another challenge is, like I said, they are under a lot of pressure, because if you're sitting right across from Mark Pilgrim, Kevin Savage, Sasha Martinengo, who have been doing this for so many years, and you are required to deliver a meticulous bulletin, one that is just like crispy clear and all of that, it is a lot of pressure and it's very difficult to handle or to deal with the nerves. But I mean, after some time, it's just a pleasure to sit back and look at and monitor.
All right, so interesting story there. The community radio station 91.9 doing really well at the Radio Awards. And how can community radio stations replicate their achievements?
Well, I think firstly they need to understand the target audience of which they would like to reach. And once you have that, you will then be able to formulate a strategy in order to be the most attractive for that target audience. And so their target audience is very high. I mean, they're based in Fancourt Office Park there in North Riding. They have managed to get cars and brand them, which means that their pockets are quite deep. And that also enables them to attract the kind of talent, that is going to be able to deliver the goods. And so I think developing that meritocracy, having a great playlist, and just being aware that the fresh radio station bringing that fresh new energy has been, very, important in enabling them, to compete with some of the best.
And it helps if your audience is got money to spend, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It might not be so easy if you're in the rural areas just outside Zanin, a small rural community. But what's in the week ahead do you see are the stories that probably are going to gain some traction for you?
Well, firstly, I think we're going to have an interesting Freedom Day on the 27th of April. The main celebrations are going to be in the Eastern Cape. So that's going to be very interesting to discuss our freedom, especially in the context that Mama Winnie Mandela passed away, Zola Skwaye passed away. And so are we going to have that dialogue about perhaps having more public holidays or, you know, rebranding the whole month? Because this is quite a fundamental month in our freedom. I think secondly, for me, one of the most tragic stories that is going to continue is the issue that happened yesterday with the Kaizer Chiefs supporters who brutally attempted to murder one of those security guards. Now, I looked at the video. I can't tell whether it's a man or a woman.
It's a woman.
But
it's a woman.
It's a woman. It is highly tragic. I think we might have to have a dialogue over what is wrong with the men of this country. You look at these front page stories, you look at how our society is constructed, from the racism to the patriarchy to tribalism and xenophobia. All of these things, by and large, are being perpetuated by men. So
and
I think we need to have
violence.
a dialogue.
Will Supra Mahumapelo have a job by the end of this week, do you think?
No. I'll make a bold, I mean, it's quite clear. If your neighboring country's border has been closed, that is a huge diplomatic issue. It's a huge tourism issue. It hits hard on business. And so we cannot continue to have that, and the community is not happy. So the ANC needs to act.
Tebogo, always a pleasure to talk to you, our media analyst for this week. Tebogo Dishego, thank you so much indeed for your insights. And that's where we're going to have to wrap it up, folks. Thanks very much indeed for watching Media Monitor, and join us again at the same time next week, right here on the same channel, SABC News Channel. Good night, good morning, goodbye.